Good day to everybody. Today we are going to speak about equivalence and adequacy in translation, points of difference. So I think you are ready to listen to it and to watch the PPTs, and if you have got any questions, you are welcome. When we speak about equivalence, it means equal in value, amount, volume. It is said by Hornby. Especially it is related to the same equivalent in the means of words, in the words of expressions concerning the language. And different kind of scientists give different point of views. For example, Catford says equivalence translation and adequate translation are the same. But others, for example, Komisarov says adequate translation is a synonym of the word a good translation. He gives different point of views. Besides, it's possible to compare equivalent and adequate translation. Here below, we are going to compare both types of translation, what is equivalent translation and what is adequate translation. We try to define each term separately in our lecture. So equivalence means the text in different languages can be equivalent in different degrees, fully or partially equivalent in respect of different language levels. The terms equivalent were discussed and adequacy were discussed for a long time, and there is not clear cut between these two terms. But today we are going to make some kind of clearance between them. First of all, let's consider each term separately. So what is equivalent translation and what is adequate translation? According to Nilubin, equivalence can be used in more general sense and as well as in more narrow sense, concerning to the context. Equivalence is absolute symmetrical relationship between words of different languages, especially equivalence and translation, especially choosing the same meaningful word in the second language. It is called equivalent translation. Adequacy. Adequate translation means a good translation. Equivalent translation is a technical category or referring to an established standard which implies the greatest possible identity or similarity of all content levels of the source language and the target language. Adequacy is based on the actual practice of translation. Equivalent translation presupposes maximum possible transference from one language into another. When we speak about experience of the translator, the translator may generalize on his experience while giving the meaning of the text of the source language. But in equivalent, he tries to choose the same equivalent in the second language. So everybody knows that the translator is responsible for adequate fiction translation. Proper fiction translation is an indicator of the translator's talent, especially when the translator is talented, adequate translation appears. When translator is not talented, he tries to choose only equivalence, not adequacy. Adequate translation is not about word-to-word translation. What does it mean? Adequacy stands for correspondence of the target text in the source language text, including the expressive meanings of the translation. He tries to use expressiveness. He tries to give the meaning, expressiveness of the source language in the target language. Adequate translation is determined by semantic and pragmatic equivalence between the original and the target language texts. Certain lexical and grammatical elements can be translated with various variants, and a lot of different ways can be made, can stand before the translator. Adequate translation creates specific difficulties for translator, and of course it should be created with the experience of the translator. When we speak about the examples you can see on the screen, you can see Russian sentence and the two translations. The first one is determined as equivalent translation, second one is adequate, because in the second one the translator gives only the meaning of the text, not the structure of the text in the target language. So the first version makes dictionary equivalent, second version gives the sense, the meaning of the sentence, and that's why the scientists underline is adequate translation. According to the Rice and Farmers, they say equivalence, it is a relationship between several marks and between the whole text between two languages. But adequacy, it is a relationship between cultures. So when we speak about adequacy, it is a relationship between two cultures, but equivalent is a relationship between the marks, between the whole texts. And some of the people, for example, Komisarov says, adequate translation can be equivalent translation, but equivalent translation cannot be adequate translation. If you look at the example, you can see how experientially gives the translation. Is given translation by the interpreter, translator. Yasid сказал. You can see Iron Fool excused himself. According to the scientist, according to the author, the translator used adequate translation. While just listening to my lecture, you can come back again and read the sentence again, look through the PPT again, and analyze sentences. When we speak about I've lost it, I've lost my touch, in Russian version they say it, я разучилась, я больше не умею стряпать. So they say, analyzing these two sentences, translation, the authors say there is adequate translation. They didn't just translate word for word, they didn't choose equivalent, but they gave the meaning of the sentence in Russian, and that's why they think the translation was adequate. So it means that while translating, you shouldn't just rely on the first meaning of a dictionary meaning. You should just give the sense of the translation. This is called adequate translation. So adequacy, give attention. The next underlined word, the sort of beer, was translated in two ways: мысль о пиве и мысль о кружке пива. The second version is accepted as adequate translation. So sometimes the question comes, is just absolute translation, is it possible? This question comes, is it possible to give the absolute translation? There are given some ideas by some authors. There is ordinarily no full equivalence between code units. There are not equivalent between the two languages or several languages. All of them are unique, and that's why adequate translation is sometimes impossible. They try to do their best to give the adequate translation, but sometimes it's impossible. Absolutely equivalent translation that would reproduce the source text fully and without distortion is partially impossible. They give this version just relying on the experienced materials in the translation world. And that was the end of today's lecture, and we hope that you got some information about equivalent and adequate translation. Thank you very much.